So we're on Daf Tzadi Omid Beis, and we're on the top line. And we're up to Orel, Hazah, Ismail, Sodin B'tzitzis, Kivsei Atzeres, Shofar B'lulav. And we're going to go through these cases one by one. So the first case is Orel, and we're talking about a ger whose gerus took place on Erev Pesach. And Beis Hillel is of the opinion that we're not going to shech the Korban Pesach on behalf of this Orel, who now was Misgayer, because we're afraid that next year people will confuse it with a case of a Tamei Mes that requires 7 days of Tara before he can bring the Korban. I'll read to you the Hebrew translation. He says, Ein shochtin olav, Korban Pesach l'das Beis Hillel shechashashu shema l'shana haba, next year, Yitame b'tumas mes, the Erev Pesach. So they're confusing an Orel with someone who's Tame tumas mes, because Orel and tumas mes go together as one group with regard to Korban Pesach. They are both excluded from a Korban Pesach. The Yomru Arishana Shahavra Erev Pesach Niskayarti. I converted a year ago on Erev Pesach. V'tavalti. I went into the mikvah. V'achalti miyad, and I ate from the Korban Pesach. Is gama achshav now too. Etbol. I'll go into the mikvah. V'akriv Korban Pesach miyad. He doesn't make the following distinction. Shebeshana Shavra last year, who ayon nachri she'eno makabel tumah. He mistakenly thought that he's tamei, and yet immediately after he went into the mikvah on Erev Pesach, he was able to eat from the Korban Pesach. Is Gazu Beis Hillel that he mistakenly thinks that he's tamei because a year ago he definitely had come in contact with the dead, but there's no tumas akum, he doesn't contract tumah. And in his mind, since he thinks he is a tamei mes, Gazu Beis Hillel shekol ger shenis gayer tzorch lahamtin shivas yamin ad sheyakriv korban pesach. There's got to be a 7-day period between the time that he was misgayer and the Erev Pesach in order to allow him to bring the Korban Pesach. And once again, we're going to prove from here that the Chachamim could be Oker Dov Min HaTorah, which means that someone who's Mechuyev Korban Pesach, the Chachamim could completely negate that Chiyuv, and he will not fulfill the Mitzvah Doraisa of Korban Pesach. Then we get to case number 2, another case where the Rabbanan were Oker a Mitzvah HaTorah, and that's Hazah. Now, Loch of Hazah is that on the 3rd day and the 7th day of a Tamei Mes, he needs to have Mei Chata sprinkled on him. And if he doesn't get the Hazah of Shlishi Ushvi, he cannot bring a Korban Pesach. The Chachamim are going to tell us that if, let's take, for example, Shvi, the 7th day of his Tumah, coincides with Shabbos, we're not going to allow him to receive a Hazah, and hence he won't be able to bring the Korban Pesach. And why did the Chachamim prohibit Hazah on Shabbos, even though Midoraisa it's mutter? Because it looks like Tikkun Mana. It looks like he's fixing up something. In this case, he's fixing himself by removing his state of Tumah. So since the Rabbanan prohibited Hazah in this particular case of a Tamei Mes, therefore he will not bring the Korban Pesach. And once again, the Chachamim are flexing their authority to remove and be Oker a Mitzvah Min HaTorah, the Mitzvah of Korban Pesach. Ismail, let's say, for example, Milah on the 8th day of the baby's birth, since the baby's birth fell on Shabbos, the Torah allows Milah. However, the Moel is not permitted to bring the knife, the ismel, from a makom shelo irvupo, which means through a mavli. Let's say, for example, the ismel is located in one chutzner, and the meal is taking place in another chutzner. And to get from one chutzner to the other, you have to go through a mavli. And they failed to make an eruv around this mavli, either a korah or a lechi. They failed to do so. And the Rabbanan prohibited carrying from a chutzner into the mavli, or from a mavli into a chutzner. Now, on a doraisa level, there is no hotzah here, because the mavli is surrounded on three sides by mechitzos, and therefore it has the status of Rosh Hashanah. He's allowed to carry the ismel on a doraisa level from one chutzner to another chutzner through a mavli, but the Rabbanan prohibited under a new category of hotzah in the absence of an eruv. As a result, the mitzvah of milah will be postponed. There's no way you can fulfill the mitzvah of milah without the ismel, and the ismel is stuck elsewhere. You'd have to carry it through a chatzer she'ena mureves. Once again, the chacham are going to be oker, in this case, the mitzvah of milah, which is a mitzvah min Torah. Then we have sodim b'tzitzis. You have a beggar that's made of tzemer, of wool, or alternatively, let me give you a better example. You have a beggar that's made of pish. Ishtan means flax or linen. The Torah says that you're allowed to put tzitzis onto this beggar, even though the tzitzis are made of wool, and the beggar in this case is made of flax. And the Torah allows violating kilayim b'makom mitzvah tzitzis, but the Rabbanan are not going to allow you to do so. And why is that? Because we're afraid that he'll wear this beggar at night. And the Torah says we're isem oso u'scharta, that the mitzvah of tzitzis applies during the day and not at night. Or at least not in a beggar life. And if he designates this beggar to wear it at night, it becomes iksus laila. Therefore, he's wearing kilayim shalom b'makom mitzvah. If he wears this beggar at night or iksus laila, there's no mitzvah of tzitzis because we were isav also, and it cannot override the isa kilayim. So this very same beggar, which the Torah allows you to wear, and the essay of tzitzis overrides the isa kilayim, the Rabbanan are afraid that you wear the beggar even at a time when there's no mitzvah of tzitzis. So once again, we have another case, another example of Yech Koach B'Yad Chachamim Lakar Dov Min Torah. The Rabbanan are undermining the mitzvah of tzitzis, which is a mitzvah doraisa. Then we get to Kivsei Atzeres on Chag HaShavuos. The korban, the central korban, the unique korban is the Shtei Alechem, and the Shtei Alechem has to be accompanied by Kivsei Atzeres. And this is what's called a classic case of a korban tzibur. Now, what happens in the following scenario? The Rabbanan prohibited zrika on Shabbos, and that's called the shvus. Now, he shechts the korban, the kivsei atzeres, on Shabbos. In this case, there was an overlap between Chag HaShavuos and Shabbos. Now, let's say he shechted a l'shem ola and not l'shem shlomim. The kivsei atzeres of Shavuos of atzeres are classified as shlomim. He shechted it l'shem ola. Now the halacha is that if you shech a shlamim l'shem ola, in a case of a korban tzibur, the korban is kosher. Normally, shalol lishma is a problem. That's called shidi kodesh. But here, in a case of a korban tzibur, the law is different. And the Chachamim declared, this is the Gemara Beitz on Chaf, that we're not going to be zorek the dam of the kivtzei atzeres that was shechted on Shabbos l'shem ola rather than l'shem shlam. And the prohibition against zrika of the dam is a shvus d'Rabbanan that is going to undermine 3 mitzvot shel Torah. Number 1, zrika sadam. Number 2, if we're not zorik the dam, then there's no aktar siburim. And number 3, there's no achila of the basar carbon. So once again, we see the Chachamim to be oker dover min haTorah. Now again, you'll ask me, why would the Rabbanan prohibit the zrika of this dam, which the Torah permitted? And the answer is, once again, mirek etiku. It looks like he's fixing up the carbon, because the zrika is going to be matter the achil. Now we have shofar and lulav. If Sukkot, the first day of Sukkot, overlaps with Shabbos, or the first, well, when I say the first day of Rosh Hashanah, it's a little tricky because Rosh Hashanah really only has one day. In any event, if that day of Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, or if the first day of Sukkot is on Shabbos, the Rabbanan established in the Gemara in Sukkot Mem Gimel that there is no Tkiya Shofar. There will be no Netilas Lulav. And the Rabbanan are being oker 2 mitzvahs min haTorah on different occasions, the mitzvah of Shofar and the mitzvah of Sukkot. Why did the Rabbanan say no Shofar on Shabbos, no Lulav on Shabbos? This is a famous Gzeira de Rabbah, that we're afraid that he needs to learn how to blow the shofar. He has to take the shofar to a baki, an expert who's going to teach him how to blow the shofar, and he might inadvertently carry the shofar. Daled Amos B'Shus Hara. Same thing with regard to a lulav. There are so many intricate and complex halachas as to whether the lulav is kosher or not kosher. We're afraid that he might carry, and again, now we're talking about Sukkot on Shabbos. On Yom Tov, it wouldn't be a problem, but Shabbos is a problem. He might carry the lulav 4 amos to Saram to take it to a baki, to an expert to teach him how to take the lulav. You need nanuim in the lulav, or whether the lulav is kosher or not kosher. And therefore the Chacham were oker mitzvah min haTorah. So all these derabbanans, all these takanos, according to Rav Chisda, would be perfect examples of what Rav Chisda claims is the rule that yesh koach b'yad chachamim lakar tov min haTorah. But hashta d'shan islan, now that Rabbah gave the answer, that shevi al taseh, that when the chachamim are oker a davar min haTorah, that's only shevi al taseh, they instruct you to be passive and to not fulfill a mitzvah aseh, lo me'ekeru. That's not considered being oker davar min haTorah. The only oker min haTorah which Rabbah would object to is the kum v'aseh, where the Rabbanan would tell you to violate an iser d'oraisa. Uinami shevi al taseh. All these cases that we mentioned, starting with Orel and going all the way till Shofar and Lulav, they're all cases of shevi al taseh, and therefore Rav Chisda could not invoke any of these cases as a proof to his shita that yesh koch b'yad chachamim lakar tov min haTorah, which means to be oker tov min haTorah b'kum basei. None of these cases are kum basei. Toshma. Then the Gemara wants to prove that yesh koch b'yad chachamim lakar davar min haTorah b'kum basei. like Rav Chizda. Elov Tishma, there's a mitzvah d'oraisa to listen to a navi. Afilu omlecha avar al achas mikol mitzvah shebat Torah, even if the navi commands to violate a d'oraisa, lefi shah, meaning only for this moment, we're required to listen to him under the mitzvah of Elov Tishma. Kigon, Elio Bahar Karm, this is what we call Shchutei Chutz. Elio was makru Shchutei Chutz for the sake of disproving the Nevi'ei Abba. Now the chiyuv for halas karbon chutz lebeis hamikdash when there's no heter bamos is kares. Bakolafi shah shmalo. If he does it only for this occasion, for this moment, not on a permanent basis, that a Navi would be put to death. But if he just says, right now, I have al pi nevuah a prophecy that would allow you to bring shkutei chutz, then shomim lo, it's included under Elov Tishmun. So you see that yesh koch biad chachamim lakar dover natorah afilu bekum v'aseh, we're being oker the iser of shkutei chutz, which is a chiv karetz. Now the Gemara in this proof, this Toshma, is making a gigantic assumption. The premise that underlies this Gemara is that Navi equals Bezdin. That if I can prove to you that a Navi has the authority to undermine a lotus and allow you to violate the lotus, then who I did, the same logic would apply to Bezdin. So the Gemara says, what kind of equation is that? Shiny Hassam, in the case of a Navi, it's different. The Torah commanded you, Elov Tishmun, that you have to listen to the words of a Navi, a Horas Navi, even in a case where the Navi is Oker Dov Min HaTorah. But we never found a precedent that Yesh Koch Biad Chachamim Lakar Dov Min HaTorah. The Koch of Horas Bezdin is limited to Shevi Altasa, says Rabbah, and it doesn't extend to Kuvaseh. Navi is a whole different story. The Torah commands you to listen to the words of a Navi. So the Gemara immediately asks, okay, it's true that this heter of a Navi and will listen to the Navi in a case of Akiras Dov Min HaTorah B'Kumaseh is a Navi halacha, but why not equate Navi and Bezdin? That's called the Ligmar Mineh. We're going to derive by virtue of a Vamematzinu, an equation between Navi, where it's explicit in the Torah, that he can be Oker Dov Min HaTorah Elov Tishmun, and the case of a Bezdin, of the Chachamim. They too could be Oker Dov Min HaTorah when there's a need to do so. And we're going to derive that from Navi. The Tovar says Tosus, I don't get the equation. Second Tosus. Tani Yosef, Navi is different. Al Pi Adibur, he got a word from God. God told and commanded the people to violate these shchitei chutz. How can we derive from there that will violate the Torah law for the sake of a takana d'Rabbanan, which is shalal pi dibur? The nireh, the kevad al pi dibur shari. Why did the Torah allow being matir and isur lefi shah? The answer is mishum tzarech shah. If the Torah allowed violating the law mishum tzarech shah, then the chachamim and the bezdin can also evaluate that we need a tzarech for there's a tzarech shah. They will identify the tzarech shah. Normally, a navi identifies the tzarech shah, but the chachamim likewise. The Gemara thinks, are vested with the special expertise that they could shots up, they could evaluate a tzarech shah. Is who adin shalal pi dibur, even though the Chacham are not operating within the framework of the Nevuah, and now Tosfos wants to prove that the scope on an extent of the authority of the Chacham exceeds that of a Navi. If a Navi would come and say, I got a nevuah that there's a new mitzvah, then throw him out. That's not a Navi. We have a principle called Ein Navi Rashay L'Chadish Dover. A Navi has no right to create new mitzvahs. The Chachamim could create new mitzvahs. In fact, they created at least 7 of them. They created Netilas Yadayim and Eruvin and the mitzvah Chanukah and the mitzvah Purim and so forth and so on. So I'm just going to summarize this Tosas. Keva shall be dibur. Akar Elio din Torah litzor shah hu adin shalal be dibur. Kevan di aim navi rashoy lechadish Torah me'at. Now Tosas asks another question. In Tomar, etc. A Navi, as opposed to Bezdin, has a quality that supersedes that of Bezdin, and that's called Muchsak. Muchsak means that the Navi has proven himself over and over again. He has predicted what's going to happen, and it happened. That gives him the special status of Muchsak. Muchsak means he's absolutely reliable. But in the case of Bezdin, the Bezdin doesn't have a portfolio, a history of proving itself right. I mean, again, the Bezdin may have instituted all sorts of enactments, but there's no concept of Muchsak. Elio is Muchsak. That's why they relied on Elio to chef Bachutz. That ability to rely on a Navi to violate an Issa Torah and Issa Karis like Shutei Chutz is predicated on Muchsak. So Tosas answers that Muchsak can be established in a case of Litzorach Shah by the Otzaot Lamaisa, by the final benefit, agenda or achievement. What was Elio Hanavi's achievement? He wanted to prove that there's an Eish coming down in the Shamayim for our Korbanos, and the Nevi Abal can do whatever they want, but there's no Eish. That makes Elio Muchsak in this context. So the Gemara wants to know, what about Chachamim? If they would come along and say, well, we're in a situation where we need desperately to bring a korban b'chutz l'migdash and violate b'chutz, they also would have l'fi Shah the status of Muchsak. So the Gemara answers, Migdar Milsa Shaina. Yeah, yesh kol b'yad chachamim lakar b'dover min haTorah b'kuvaseh l'fi Shah l'tzorech hashah. That's called Migdar Milsa Shaina. And Enochinami, if let's say Elio wasn't around, and in that same scenario with the Nevi Abba, the Bezdin would tell the people of Israel, we rule that you should bring a korban on Hara Karbel, Chutzlit, then we would rely on the Chacham. That's called Migdar Milsa Shaina. But that's only a takana l'shah. That means that the Chachamim have the jurisdiction on a momentary basis, on a one-shot basis, to violate a Torah and instruct us to violate the Torah law. But after we accomplish our goal, immediately, it's no longer Lefisha, it's no longer Migdar Milsa, and certainly the Chacham would not be to create a takana for all time that would involve being Okedam Minator. Now I want to swing back for a moment to Rav Chizda. Second here, can you help me out? I'm back on pay test for just for a moment. Oh, that was Rav Chizda lo osa v'lo klum kol ikar on pay test Amid Al. You see that? It's about a little bit more than halfway down the Amud. Or midway in the Tosas Mai, if you're on Daf Pei Tes. Lo osa v'lo klum, Omar Rav Chizda kol ikar. Dafilu hahi giora hadelativula. He grieva, I should pronounce. Sorry. So the case was that he was mafresh min hatame al atar b'mezid, and Rav Chizda is going to institute a takana that the truma is not truma. And then if you fast forward to pay Tesam and Bays for a minute and drop down about 10 lines, 11 lines down to the top, Amalei Rabel or Rav Chizda Nidach, based on your ruling, the Amit that you ruled, Lo Asam Lo Klum Kol Ikar, Dafilu Ahu Griva Hadalitibule, that you have paskin that in this case where it was Torei Min Atome Al Atar deliberately, the Rabbanan are going to be mafkia, they're going to completely nullify that truma when the Yisrael was mafresh min atame, and now the truma goes back to its state of temel for the reason of gzeira dilun and pasha v'lo mafresh, is mika midi de midaraisa abi truma umichum dilma pasha afkua Rabbanan lechulim. B'chi bezdin mastim lakar dovim min haTorah. And Rav Chizda is going to go a step further. He's going to say that in our Mishnah, if she relied on the testimony of one aide, she married another man, And then subsequently, her husband comes back and she goes back and has a relation with her first husband. The child of that husband is a mamzer and is allowed to marry a mamzeres, which is again a case of oker dov min haTorah. Now these are takanos. This is not migdar milsa. This is exeres chachamim that will always apply in that situation. Whether it's hafrashas tamei al atar, whether it's a case of right chazor baila, and then she had a relationship with her first husband, etc., etc. So therefore, the Gemara is saying that although based on Navi and the price of Eila Tishmud, we come to the conclusion that Yesh Koch Biad Navi Lakar Dov Min HaTorah L'Fisha, and therefore Bezdin could likewise be Oker Dov Min HaTorah L'Fisha, but not a takana. They cannot make a takana li'olam, for all times, that would exercise this authority of Yesh Koch Biad Chacham Lakar Dov Min HaTorah. That's not true. Now take a look for a moment at Tosfos on the top of the Om, and we'll conclude with this. V'im tomar sadim b'tzitzis hechi avishevi alta said that he machase v'talis the bas chiyuvi v'yem bo tzitzare over b'yadayim. You're telling me that he has a talis that's made of pishton of linen, and the Rabbanan said not to put tzitzis on, which means the Rabbanan are telling you to wear the beged without tzitzis. That's kumba say. That's not shevi alta said. How can the Rabbanan make a takana liolam, not for bigger milsa l'fisha, that would involve violating a doraisa b'kumbasei? The Torah says you're not allowed to wear a beged with four knofels without tzitzis. Yesh lomar de b'shas itu v'akati lo machayev. When he puts on the beged, he's not chayev in tzitzis. He's only chayev after he's wearing the beged. And now the Rabbanan is saying, don't put on tzitzis, and that's called shevi altas. Okay, then. So this is where we'll. Tosfos asked the following question: being Tomar on the top of Tzadi Yomid Beis, the Perek Misha Meso. Mashmak shu lavush kilayim the ein poshtan lo chashiv shevi al taseh ela amod vaseh. Even if he's already in a state of levisha's kilayim, that's called kum vaseh if he allows himself to continue wearing the kilayim. And that's why, although Gadol Koved Abrios Shedoche Lav Shebetor, but that's only B'Kumbasei, he's going to have to strip himself of the kilayim in the middle of the street when he finds out he's wearing kilayim, and it's not called Shevi Altas, it's called Kumbasei. The shiny kilayim, the Ikar Ha'isur B'Shas Levisha Shalovash Be'isur. The Torah prohibits levisha, putting on the beged that has kilayim. Aval kan, but here we're talking about not kilayim, but we're talking about a beged of pishtan, and we're telling him that he's allowed to wear the beged that has four corners without putting on tzitzis of tzemen. That's shevi altas. And why? Because the Torah is not commanding you in the levisha, but rather once you're lavish. Aval kan lo mischayv adli achar shenis atev midabrishis miukosha midabrachina lis atev. The language of the Nusach HaBracha seems to reflect the fact that there's a mitzvah of lisatev, the active putting on the beged. Miloshan lisatev mochichos nami bahag kaimelon b'tzitzis dechovas gavra, and the Bahag uses the Nusach HaBracha on tzitzis to prove that we paskin tzitzis dechovas gavra, not a chovas mon. Now we saw the Tosfos about muchzak shining. Ilotema hochi Avram hechi shomala Yitzchak. How did Yitzchak oblige Avram Avinu Bahar Moriah or Elio Bahar Carmel Hechi Samchi Alevi Avdi Shkute Chutz just to rely on Elio unless Eliecha de Muchsak Shining. Elio Lomali Lomala Mishum de Muchsak Hamashma Dafilu below Novi Shorinami Lebezdin Lava Mishum Migdus. So the Gemara establishes in Sanhedrin that we rely on Elio Bahar Carmel for Shkute Chutz because he's Muchsak. Forget about Muchsak. Who needs Muchsak? We should equate it with the case of Bezdin. And Bezdin allows you to be Oker Davar, Mishum Migdar Milsa, even in the absence of Muchsak. The Omeri Mishum Des Chazik Benevius, Hayusoncheno, Vameshal Yamavtiach, Biuridas Eish, Vishochnin Al Avtachaso, Kodshu Bachutz. Since he was Muchsak Benevius, we could rely on him when he promised that there would be fire coming down from Shamayim, and we could shech bachutz based on that avtach. Shebizchuso b'tfiloso tered eish min Shamayim via migdar milsa she's kadish moshe kosh barabim like there's a yachsu yisrael and muta. So we don't need muchsak that in the past he's proven with miracles. What we need a muchsak in the views that we know that he's a Navi. And in this case, he was maftiach to us that there would be Ridas Eish Min HaShamayim, and that's going to lead to the great Kiddush Hashem of Yachzu Yisrael L'Mut. Now, at this point in the Gemara, we're going to speak about the principle of Kol D'Makadesh Ama Adaite D'Rabbana Makadesh. And that means that the Rabbanah could be Oker a get, which is Chal Min HaTorah. They can decide through a Gzera that they completely are Mavatal the get. And that would only make sense, according to Rava, those who rejected Rav Chisda, if we hold that Afkinu Rabbanon L'Kedusha. That's going to be in Mirza Shem's Yufah tomorrow. Now, he quotes a kasha here in the name of the Ramban. Echo chicha gemara misham. Sheish kof biyad chacham lakadom in a Torah adrab shom uvua sherak l'tzorch shahi tiru bara shabel vad. Avalol l'sakim takana l'doros. So that which Eliyahu Novi was allowed based on Eluf Tishma, that's because it was not a takana l'doros. And Rav Chisda, in his perspective of Yesh kof biyad chacham, he's talking about a takana l'doros. Ramban answers, Shegemara Sobra Bahavamina, Shakol Lefisha Shamalo. When we say that Lefisha that listened to Eliyahu on Har Carmel to violate Shkutei Chutz, Lo Ba El Lamait Shelo Yomar Novi Chazar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mi Mitzvah Zu Ubatla. The Eino Rotze Sheti Yasru Eliyahu. God doesn't want you to fulfill his mitzvah at all. L'kach ein shamu, because lo tigra. Aval yesh koch biad chachamim l'sak ein shum tigrun l'tzorech afilu l'doros. That's what the Gemara wants to prove from Eliyahu. Okay, then, so this is where it's like kol haTorah kula in this sunnah.